I just asked the audience, we just put these pictures up. Anybody know what those are? Anybody want to say? Anybody know?
Rapid scan machine pictures.
Yeah, that's TSA. That's what you look like when you go through the TSA. And I saw that today and I thought, I don't even recognize my country anymore. I don't want to live in a country where that's going on. I mean, that's spooky stuff. That is spooky stuff. That's what happens when you want to go someplace on an airplane. I want to introduce a couple of friends of mine. Brad Thor is the author of Full Black, and Barrett Moore is a life continuity expert. Is that what, really? Is that what your title says? It was better than spooky dude. This guy's trying to keep people alive if indeed people like Brad and I are right, and he believes it as well. Then it's going to be guys like this are going to be at the top of the food chain, trying to keep people moving and alive. Let's start with, well, where do you want to start? There's some technology I want to get to, but
yeah,
you want to get
a background. You've done a great job, obviously, setting the table. What got me onto this topic, you and I have had all these talks over the years, and there's a lot of what we talked about that ended up in my last book, Full Black. What I'm working on now for Black...
You still haven't written me in as a character. It's really pissing me off. But
I'm going to do it. I got to figure out a way to keep you alive to the end of the book.
Right.
It'll be good. I want to read a quote to you quickly from Frank Church. The Church Committee investigations were done in '75. This was kind of a precursor to the Senate Committee on Intelligence. And he had this great quote about America's capacity to listen in to its citizens. This is in 1975. I know you got the condensed one you're going to put on the screen. I want to read just a little bit that's not going to be on the screen. That capability at any time could be turned around on the American people and no American would have any privacy left. Such is the capability to monitor everything. This is in '75, Glenn. Telephone conversations, telegrams, it doesn't matter, Church said. There would be no place to hide. If this government, our government, ever became a tyrant, if a dictator ever took charge in this country, the technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny. And there would be no way to fight back because the most careful effort to combine together in resistance to the government, no matter how privately it was done, is within the reach of the government to know. Such is the capability of this technology.
Okay.
No revolution.
Okay. You said something, and I wrote something down on it's my new day with a moleskin. First day with this new moleskin. On the front page, somebody remind me at the end of the show to open this up and show you, I truly believe, because of that, it went through my mind again that the Lord is going to bless us with something that we will not think is a blessing, but will absolutely be a blessing at some time in our lifetime. I hope I'm wrong, but it will be a blessing. Somebody remind me to open this up, and I'll show you that. We'll leave it there. Okay. So that was 1975.
75. And now we've got to what is being called, and this is the term that you and I know that we queried the audience on before we came back from the break. What's been created now in this country is a digital panopticon. And for those who don't know what a panopticon is, there was an 18th century British social scientist who came up with an idea on how to design a new kind of prison where you would put the guard tower in the center of the building and build the prison cells around that tower. So the prisoners never knew for sure if they were being observed. But it would help influence their behavior because they had to assume, because the punishments were meted out quickly and very, very severely. So these guys, you could leave them for 6 months and not watch them, but if you punished them bad enough and they thought they were being watched, it was a perfect way to influence behavior. We have that now in this country digitally, and that's where the concept of digital...
I mean, I don't see this in Dallas, but I know it's happening. In New York City, they're everywhere. The cameras are everywhere. And Bloomberg was on record saying last year that we just don't, this is a quote, we just don't want people to think they could go anywhere in New York City. Really? When did that happen? Yes, we do. It's America. Okay, so 1975. Let's take it to the next level, because was it Tips that came first or Promise?
Promise, and then Tips is, because it's a classified thing and I couldn't use the real name of it, I gave it Total Intelligence Protocol. Paradigm, okay. Sorry, Total Intelligence Paradigm. Okay,
so let's talk because this takes us back to the 70s with Promise. Explain what Promise was in the 1970s.
PROMIS is a system that was used to track cases throughout the federal court system. What it did, if you imagine a piece of information having like suitcase handles all around it, what PROMIS did is it allowed you to grab that case by any handle you wanted. You could grab it by the judge that was working on it. You could come in on the computer and look for the defendant, the arresting officer,
the crime.
How soon into a court case of this nature did this particular judge normally settle out? All this kind of stuff. Well, the intelligence...
It tagged every aspect of everything.
Everywhere. It was, you could grab it from any angle. This became very interesting for the intelligence community, who said, whoa, what if we could start using this to watch our enemies and to go after people by tracking them via their the trail they leave, the intelligence trail. So what ended up happening is this thing kind of got pulled into that world of intelligence gathering, and they started adding things to it. What's interesting, and one of the things you and I talked about, was this ability to get, for PROMIS to go hack into utility databases.
Okay, wait. When did this happen?
Mid-'80s. Started with a...
Are you willing to say any of your background other than a continuity guy? Because you have an awful lot of credibility when people know who you are. Are you willing to say?
I'm a guy who starts companies. I've got an intelligence background. I work for the government in a variety of capacities for quite a few years, and I've had a chance to build a security company, and we moved into a space where we're all about life continuity. And what that really means is we as a society spend an inordinate amount of time and energy protecting the inanimate objects in our lives, homes, boats, cars, whatever it is. And we're not paying any attention to the sanctity of life. And the reality is we need to be paying attention to that, because we're all individually extremely dependent on a very, very sophisticated and fragile supply chain. Most people don't begin to understand how their life dangles at a thread at any given day based on their individual circumstances. So perhaps today we can kind of shine some light on that.
Okay. So back in the 80s, he didn't answer the question, did you notice that?
Back to PROMIS.
Yes, back in the 80s, they started to bring this in and say, let's tag our enemies, and it started to morph.
It's the first version of the Terminator, okay? This is the original Terminator model, where you set this thing loose and it starts chewing through databases. It gets into stuff where normally you can't access it unless you go put the old tapes into the machine. This thing starts writing its own code to go back and get blind data, this is incredible for this kind of technology. It's amazing. It hacks into databases, and it particularly likes databases that have information about you that you wouldn't normally think would be useful to the government. Your electric bill, your water bill, all that kind of stuff. Your credit card bills, your banking, all this stuff. And what it does is creates a relationship tree.
Okay, now let me ask you, does anybody have any idea why the government would want the information on your water usage?
I may be housing a bunch of people to do something.
Very good, right off the bat.
That's excellent. And not only that, but okay, your water usage has gone up from the baseline. You've got more people in your house. Now I'm going to start figuring out who you've got in your house, because I'm going to go through all the people you talk to on your cell phone, all the people you do emails with, and I'm going to look at their water usage and see if it's gone down. If it's gone down, I'm going to look at their credit cards. Do they buy gas? And can I track the gas stations going towards your house? And I'm going to try to figure out who do you have in your house and what is it that you're planning? Because you've got Bill, Bob, and Ted there. Well, Bill, Bob, and Ted all took this class at Columbia about rules for radicals, if you will. And that's how this stuff starts coming together. And what's really scary is the PROMIS system started spreading around the world, and foreign intelligence agencies were using this to track down dissidents. And there's a lot of...
This is back when the Soviet Union was still around. They were killing the good guys using it because they were bad governments, and they stole our technology. But here's where it gets worse. Just like the Russians took Ebola and souped it up, our enemies souped this thing up even more, and we now have it. Do we not? Well, in theory.
Okay, so this is the next gen of this thing is to marry it with artificial intelligence, to be able to figure out not where you are, but where you're going to be next. And that's where it really starts getting scary.
Okay.
Well, let me interrupt you. There's a segue there. You were talking a little earlier about Google. You know, the change in the privacy policy, they didn't change anything other than their lawyers said, hey, you're going to expose yourself. You need to get this in the public realm. Most people are under the mistaken belief that Google is all about search. Okay, Google is all about artificial intelligence.
Big time.
Search is the mechanism that they are using to model and understand human behavior so that they can then move on to, as it is, artificial intelligence, which gives them ultimately, and I hate to use the terminology, but the Terminator, as it might be. The Terminator had artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the artificial intelligence, and that's what almost all of this stuff is you're given a piece of candy to keep you quiet. And the piece of candy is quick information, but really it is all about, read to, is it Into the Plex? That is all about artificial intelligence. I waited 10 years. I tried to get an interview with this man. 10 years. I was a nobody at the time, so it was a long waiting list for nobodies. His name is Ray Kurzweil. You know who he is? He's the guy who did invented the first synthesizer, the Kurzweil synthesizer. He's the guy who does speech to text. He was the first one to do that. He works for Google. He works for Microsoft. He is what's called a futurist. I talked to him when I was over at CNN. I spent an hour with him. 10 years I waited to talk to this guy. One of the most brilliant men and spooky men you'll ever meet in your life. He doesn't see a problem with any of this. But the future that he lays out, and remember, he consults with Bill Gates. He goes to Apple. They pay him large sums of money to say, we're thinking about developing this software, and he'll say, no, that's going to be old in 5 years. You need to go here. His calls that are right, his batting average is off the charts. He talks about artificial intelligence within the next 20 to 30 years, if it lasts that long, you will take your computer and you will try to turn it off, and as you approach it, it will say, please don't, I'm lonely. By 2050, the largest group of attorneys will be those representing artificial intelligence and computers. And the discussion will become, which life is real, yours or artificial life? You read Ray Kurzweil, read In the Age of Spiritual Machines. It came out in the 1990s. Have you read that?
No, you've recommended it. It's on my
list. Read it. It is really good. It came out in the 1990s. And then read Into the Plex, and you will see who's doing the work. It's pretty frightening stuff. Okay, I want to get to this board here next, which really kind of shows the loss of liberty, protecting liberty, and what they're doing and how they're doing it when we come back. Beck. Our underwriter this half hour is food insurance. Every family should have a plan of what to do in an event of an emergency. Ready.gov, FEMA, CDC, they all have lists that can help you develop a plan. Do you have one? Yeah, I'm going to listen to those like I'm going to tie a rope around my neck and go skiing out of a tree. Food insurance will help you and your family. This is a 72-hour kit. Brad was talking to me during the commercial. These things are great. The people are great. This has everything you need for 72 hours. I'm just trying to see if there's any food or snacks in here. I know they're down here someplace. It has absolutely everything that you need. This is beef stroganoff with noodles. It looks bad, but I've actually opened some of these things. I was just doing research. That's all I was doing. You put water in it. They last 25 years, and you have everything you need for 3 days, so you can survive. I want you to know, for coming today, everybody gets one of these. We have packs for everybody for coming, and I want to thank you for that. But this will be a lifesaver for you, at least for 3 days. Food insurance has these packs and so much more. I want you to find out all about it at foodinsurance.com or call 866-9-GOT-FOOD. Foodinsurance.com. Okay, are we ready? Are we back now? Okay, let me go to Mr. Cryptic over here and find out you made this kind of this three-wheel system. I feel like I'm in Vegas. Explain what this is.
We can spin them.
Yeah, I know.
Well, we need to ground everyone here. Unfortunately, again, as you alluded to at the beginning of the program, challenge us in anything we say, but this is true. Privacy is dead in this country. It's over, okay? There is absolutely nothing you can do to get it back. There are certain incremental improvements, as it might be. If you listen carefully and you become a student of this, you might be able to help your children. But there's almost no one in this studio who can recover their privacy now because you've been lulled into a false sense of complacency, and you don't begin to understand, I'll use the word forces, completely wrong word, but as it is the assets that have been applied to you, whether it's been a government intelligence asset or whether it just has to do with a business trying to data mine, as it might be. There is no such thing as privacy.
Go deeper into that. What does that mean? Like for instance, I go to doctors. I don't want them to put me into their computers. If you don't keep your records on paper, I don't go see you.
We'll get through this on the next board. We can go through all the categories, but it's telecommunications, it's your financial records, it's your schooling, it is every purchase you make, it's the things that you eat. A perfect example, we've all heard about pre-existing conditions from an insurance standpoint. That's been a battle for the last few years. I mean, that is just the tip of a very large iceberg, which is they're trying to determine, well, you had a pre-existing condition, we're not going to insure you. Well, the entire insurance industry is broken, but that is a microcosm when you can't get insurance because the world, a database as it might be, and we'll come back to what that means, a database recorded that particular health issue. It never goes away. One of the mantras that we're going to teach you today, there are really two things that if you walk away from this program, it's the lens you need to look at through the world. In fact, before we get to that, let's talk about this. As this program, the idea behind this program developed, we tried to ground it. Initially, it was going to be about surveillance, and then we were going to do another program about preparation, and Glenn had the good idea of trying to put these things together because ultimately it impinges on liberty. Now, we've done a half circle here representing there are umpteen different categories that fall into liberty. It could be having capitalism, it could be free speech, it could be freedom of movement, it could be a variety of different things. And we could talk about that at some point, but for the purposes of today, the nexus of government surveillance and corporate data collection, as it might be, which is privacy is dead. And on the other hand, preparation, which is we're all incredibly dependent on a supply chain. What can we do today to try to mitigate that risk? So to go back to that lens that we want to talk to, there are two things that I think about constantly every day. One is, don't forget the term, databases never forget. Once the data is in a database, it's all over. It'll never get there. And if you can figure out a way to keep it out of the database, and there are a variety of ways to do that sometimes, you're going to help.
Wait. What should we try to keep out? I mean, at this point, what would you say, like, you know what, don't put that in the database. Don't ever put that in a database.
I'll give you a perfect example. Recently, I was in on behalf of a client, and we were changing some car titles on them. They wanted to know my driver's license number because we were doing the work associated with that client, and I wasn't going to give them my driver's license number. They insisted upon it, and they got a driver's license number that perhaps didn't match.
Right.
So there are ways, and we didn't break any laws or no issues.
But your driver's license number is already in the system.
Yeah, but I didn't have any nexus to that client and those vehicles that they own.
Okay.
It could be the doctor's office that wants to have your Social Security number. In your monologue, you talked about national ID and the fact we might all have a unifying password. Well, how's that Social Security number worked out for everyone? Okay, you know, that is an unmitigated disaster in this country, and that is our de facto ID number. I mean, it is, look at whether we talk about border security and false documents, whether we talk about all the nonsense associated with the government mandating these certain regulatory issues, and we'll come back and talk about that. So in any event, if we talk about databases never forget, and the other favorite of mine is 2 is 1 and 1 is none. What that really does is talks about redundancy. It's really if, from a military perspective, if you were to be perhaps working in a very austere, difficult environment, you had to bring in everything you needed to do, and you had a piece of equipment that was contingent upon completing that mission, you darn better well have 2 of those, because if the one fails, you're there and you have no purpose. So when you're talking about your life, and I'm talking about your life in certain circumstances, okay, you better have 2 of these things, and that's a good way to think about it. So in any event, as we begin to look at these 2 worlds, I think we can begin to look at each one of these segments, and perhaps at a commercial we'll look at the next board and we can dive into some of those things.
Okay, so this makes my head hurt. Give me an example of something that you should have 2 of.
Well, 10% of the population is in what we call a medically dependent stage, where if we remove their access to timely medicines, they literally will perish. So a perfect...
How many, what's the percentage?
About 10% of the population.
Okay.
I mean, we know the underlying data, which is if there was ever an EMP in the country, and we can talk about that in a moment, 10% of the population would be dead inside of 2 weeks because they wouldn't have their medicine. There's just nothing we could do about it.
So how would you get medicine when you're not, when you shouldn't have to.
You have it before you need it. That's the key.
I know
here.
that. I
but
know that.
most
I mean-
doctors, if you can get a 30-day prescription, if you can find a doctor that's willing to do a 90-day prescription for you, that's the way to get started. So there's a lot of baby
Is
steps.
that doing anything wrong? Is that is
No.
the doctor doing anything wrong?
No, but it's the insurance companies driving that. Typically, they won't allow you to do that because they don't want to pay for it. So what you have to do is, again, it's
Save your money and,
That's
and
correct.
pay for it yourself.
And oftentimes you got to pay up and pay retail for that medicine because you won't get the discount that's been negotiated by your healthcare provider or your insurance company.
Okay.
So
Okay. We'll turn the chalkboard around and we'll pick it up after the news from the Blaze.
I don't think, but I don't.
Yes, you do.
I'm not a lawyer.
Brad Thor, author of Full Black, which if you haven't met, when did that come out? A year ago?
It came out last summer.
Okay, a great book. I think it's one of the best you've
Thank
done. I was
you.
going to say the best, and then I remember the
Last
Thomas
Patriot,
Jefferson,
yeah.
The Last Patriot. Barrett Moore is here, a life continuity expert, and he is telling us about this wheel and now the specific things that we have to do. What is under surveillance, and how do you prepare? What is databases never forget, and 2 is 1 and 1 is none?
Well, I think we can give you some anecdotal evidence as it is as to what is happening in each one of these segments. Now, before people barrage you on emails, we don't have enough Blackboard space to begin going through all the categories. For example, in the surveillance world, there are about 18 areas that we spend a lot of time worrying about. There'd be sectors of our lives where information is being collected. So we have 7 here. And in a preparation space, there are about 30 categories you need to be worried about, and we're going to cover 7, kind of bread and butter issues. So I know there's some other...
Can I ask a stupid question? This is something I shouldn't ask on television, but aren't we doing something? Aren't you guys preparing something? Aren't we doing something that we're going to be working on and showing people?
We actually have been discussing
Yeah.
how do we take this information, because we've only got 2 hours and it's already going fast in the show, and there is so much we are working on a project. I guess we're announcing our project, so to speak, here a little bit.
I always play dumb because then they're like, oh crap, well now we're doing it. And I'm like, yes,
But
oh darn.
we are working on a project together with Mercury to bring this information, to bring it out to the general public, to be
Yeah.
the authoritative source for life continuity.
Because this is the number
preparedness.
one question of how do we prepare? And you guys are the best at it. All right.
Well, there's a mind-boggling array of information out there, and a lot of it's awful good. Put it through the lens that when you look through life and make a decision whether you think it makes sense. But we're going to establish a foundation here today, open your eyes as it might be, and you'll watch GBTV in the future, and I'm sure you're going to have other opportunities to kind of get that 201, 301, and 401 classes. Hopefully Glenn will bring those to you. So let's talk a little bit about the surveillance area where we have some vulnerabilities. So we'll kind of talk about the bad, and then we're going to talk about the good being how you can, as it is, live on the edge of the herd. That's another one of my mantras, which is have the courage within your community, your family, your friends, your corporations to live on the edge of the herd. What's that mean? You don't have to be like everyone else. Just because no one else is prepared doesn't mean that you don't have to be unprepared. The single greatest mistake I see with clients is they believe in checkbook capitalism, which is, I've got a checkbook, I've got some financial resources, what else do I need to do? It couldn't be further from the truth, okay? That checkbook, in the time of need, in the time of things that could go bad, and they come in a variety of flavors, that checkbook arguably isn't going to do anything for you. So listen carefully. So let's just talk about the financial world, which is, in fact, let's skip to communications because it's easier, which is if I have your phone records, I have your home phone record, I have your business phone records, and I have your cell phone records, I own you, okay? I know everyone you know, okay? I know everyone you communicate with. I can look at the patterns, I can determine where you live, I can find your family, and that is information that's readily available. Again, it's supposed to be private, but it is readily available, and that's just due to technology as it might be. Interesting enough, the NSA, the National Security Agency, is of course the biggest transgressor. There has been, you may have followed this over the last 4 or 5 years, the NSA has basically been spying on Americans, even though it's against the law, and they've been doing that for well over a decade. And
Bill Clinton announced this. What was the name of that server, that computer program? What is it? Echelon.
Well, it's gone well beyond Echelon.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Echelon was a system that, in essence, took signals out of the air and examined them. What's happened is they have a separate program, and it goes by a variety of names. But what it's done is they've actually gone in on the internet backbones, and they developed a technology. It's called a digital splitter. And what it ensured is that every communication that came across that trunk line, as it was duplicated. One went off to their server farm, and the other one went off and was delivered to its intended recipient. They literally are choking on data. Now, interesting enough, at Camp Williams in Utah, the NSA is in the late stages of completing a brand new 1 million square foot data center because they, of course, ran out of room at Fort Meade. Well, Fort Meade really ran out of room because the government, great guys, look, they're on our side by and large, okay? Don't ever misconstrue that I'm against the government, I'm against our intelligence services. But sometimes they get a little rambunctious and they forget that we have civil liberties. But the reality of that is the impediment at Fort Meade in expanding it was they were sucking too much electricity out of the grid, and they couldn't pull any more out of it without building a whole series of new nuclear power plants, which of course get the environmentalists involved.
And if I can jump in here a second,
Yeah.
Glenn, something that's fascinating is there was a paper done at the Brookings Institute about how it is getting less and less expensive to store more and more data. And we have this interesting paradigm that's happening now where it is actually nudging dictators further into being dictators, and relatively free governments are now saying, well, wait a second, I can store one of the interesting pieces of intel or information I came up with, that if you wanted to store all the telephone conversations in the United States now, it basically costs you 17 cents a year per person. By 2015, that'll be 2 cents a year per person. And there was a great formula done.
Good thing we're going to be broke.
Well, but we're going to be broke, but what's
are
interesting, we are broke. What's interesting, though, is that if the government wants to do this stuff, what people see coming is a public safety tax, so that citizens will actually have to pay for being observed and being under surveillance all the time. So it's an interesting thing to see as the technology improves, it actually encourages governments.
I had a guy
surveil.
call me. He was, a decent figure in Google, and he told me we're digging trenches around our server farms. He said we have pretty good trenches. He said, but we're digging these things. I think he said 10 feet deep. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, you might want to look into the relationship between Google and the government. We seem to be in business with the government. I don't know what they're doing, but it's pretty darn interesting that the government is looking even for more space for servers. They're building it also, a huge one in Virginia.
And they can dig ditches outside Google, but they can't do it at the border.
Yeah.
That's another.
Yeah.
Well, Glenn, actually, that you're touching arguably on the social media space, and notwithstanding there have been some phenomenal developments there, whether we're talking about Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, whatever it might be. If you dig deep enough, you can actually find some of the organizations that funded those entities.
Well, no, come on, come on.
Hanging it out there.
Who?
Well, the Central Intelligence Agency has a venture capital firm. They've had it for 15 years. They've had it about 10 years. And they fund nascent early technologies, and if it happens to have a nexus that complements their mission, so be it. So the social media space has been the absolute greatest boon to the people that want to monitor us.
This is why the Library of Congress is now saving every tweet, every Facebook, everything.
And what is today? Today's the 1-year anniversary of the uprising in Egypt, which was largely credited to Twitter and YouTube. So it's interesting that we should be here tonight.
Okay.
talking
We could do a whole program on the social media and the
we will.
negative ramifications of
Okay.
it. It's particularly scary.
All right, so let's go to a little bit of preparation here. Or does anybody have any questions on anything yet? You guys are just like... None, okay. All right, here we go.
Preparation. There are about 30 categories where we need to be prepared, and they run the gamut. Preparation really falls into two worlds. One for immediate need. You've got now a nice, wonderful 72-hour pack. Are you going to protect a defined group of people for a defined period of time? Or are we worried about, as it might be, the collapse of society, and we're worried about what we call sustainability? Those are really kind of two different worlds. Today we're talking about preparation. We're talking about your interruption of the supply chain due to a natural disaster, or it could be a financial disaster, as it might be. One only really has to look at any individual, whether it's the tuna fish we eat, or whether it's the peanut butter that goes on our sandwiches, or it's the aspirin that's on the store shelves. The United States has been the leader in the technology that underpins an incredibly efficient supply chain. it is lowered our cost. It's absolutely brilliant. But unfortunately, there's good with bad. Inadvertently, as corporations have become more and more and more and more efficient in terms of delivering goods, and we've come to suffer from what I call the 7-Eleven effect. And what the 7-Eleven effect is, we are 2 generations deep of people in this nation who have only ever known 7-Eleven to be open 24 hours a day and the store shelves be full. So why in the world would I have to have a pantry? I can go down to 7-Eleven. The stores are always open. Well, if you understood how often they got resupplied, all one has to do is look at the videos that take place post a hurricane, or pre-hurricane and post a hurricane, and you see those big empty shelves.
Anybody tell me how many times are the grocery stores resupplied? Weekly? Every night?
It depends on where the grocery store, whether it's suburban or it's rural, but the average grocery store gets 14 deliveries a day. Under normal uses, the store shelves are empty within 3 days. If there's a run on something, it's hours. But that's on average. Now, the chain stores are slightly different, but the stuff you care about, it's hard to come by. Now, this is expensive stuff. I mean, the reality about preparation, and we all have to live under budgets, is you're asking yourself to advance expenses theoretically into the future. So what that means is if you wanted to protect yourself and have the necessities on hand to protect your family, as it might be, for 1 month, then you have to look at what it costs to operate your family for a period of 1 month and anticipate all those needs in a variety of categories. So if we look at life's necessities, they actually start with air. It's a little more complicated subject than we want to go in today. But we've got, obviously, water. You can't go much more than about 3 days without water. Food, shelter, there's clothing in there. A plan is important. Fuel and power important. Medical is important. Mindset is important. But the list goes on. There's a myriad of things. Transportation, communication, spare parts. It goes on and on and on. What I encourage everyone to do is develop a mindset and a plan, and you begin to budget this. Most people can't go out and just spend $10,000 overnight on something like this. So start spending $500 a month, as it might be. Hopefully nothing happens in the meantime, and before you know it, at the end of the year, you've got a sizable little cache of stuff, as it might be. And you become more sophisticated. And I think hopefully in the future, Glenn will do some programs where we can literally get into the building blocks as to what you do on day 1 and what you want to do on day 2, and then you go from there. And that'll really help you. You got a question?
Yes.
How important is like documentation? Like I feel like this drive that I need to get my daughter's birth certificates, like couple copies, and
Wait, you're feeling like a prompting or a
I just feel like I just keep feeling like I need to do it, and I keep not doing it. And
do it.
I know.
First thing you need to do, and I think you will agree with me, first thing you need to do is stop dismissing things. When you think of it, do it. Don't hesitate. Do it. How significant is documentation?
Well, I use a perfect example. When I travel overseas, I carry an extra birth certificate. I also carry a photocopy of my passport in the event it was to be lost. And that, of course, speeds up the process of your local embassy verifying that you actually are a U.S. citizen and theoretically gets you a passport a lot quicker. So that's emblematic of having documents. I mean, the irony that you pointed out so often is, we need to provide ID practically to buy anything in a store. Here's your Visa card, I'd like to see your ID, but we don't need it to vote. So, we've got a world that's turned upside down.
The problem is, I mean, for instance, medical records, having your medical records printed out and having them there, only because if your medical records, if things went down, God forbid we had an EMP, God forbid is somehow or another, your medical records are now trapped someplace, you have nothing. You have nothing. You have to be able to prove this is mine. For instance, what happens if the financial system crashes and you don't have,
all your statements are electronic.
All your statements, I have them
yeah.
online. Well, those are gone. Well, how much money did you have here? Last I looked. Well, last I looked doesn't mean anything. I could come in and say, last I looked, I had $1 million here.
Have you ever noticed, excuse me, Glenn, have you ever noticed when you log on to your credit card account, if you're still getting paper statements, the first thing they hit you with is, do you want to continue having paper or electronic? They, of course, want to do it electronic because it lowers their cost. But the reality is you'd be foolish not to maintain that documentation.
In terms of preparation for the documentations, do you recommend having them in multiple spots, or I mean,
The answer is, of
How
course,
far
yes.
down this road do you want to go? 'Cause
That's right.
I'll take you. He'll take you a
the
great
way down the
distance. I'll
rabbit
take
hole.
you a little farther, and he's going to take you all the way.
Well, let's go back and talk about the medical piece, and we can talk briefly about that because time's short. I'm a huge proponent from a medical. If you are an individual that's largely healthy, it's not an issue. If you're someone that has medical issues, I'm a huge proponent of an encrypted thumb drive, something that you can keep on your person. If you lose it, it's not gone. There are other people that are proponents of web-based solutions. We're going to come back and talk about why I think that's a bad idea, especially if you're worried about privacy. If you're worried only about your health and you don't care, as it might be, then put it out on the web.
Well, most people say, look, nobody's tracking me. I'm an average person. It's not gonna matter. I haven't done anything wrong. Look, they want to watch me go and get my milk at 7-Eleven. Why shouldn't I? If it's only my medical records, I'm not going to do anything wrong. Why shouldn't I have my medical records?
Now, this is interesting with the storage issue as we talk about storage coming down in cost. One of the things that's been raised as an ethical thing is if the government can watch you all the time and can record everything you do, they will be able to go back in time. So right now, you're just the guy going to the store buying the milk and all that kind of stuff. But at some point in the future, they can retroactively build a case. This is the idea. And this is everything's fine. I have a friend who says, there was a great article on The Blaze about a piece of technology that is going to scan people as they go by to see if your heart rate's up, if you're perspiring, are your eyes dilated, because they're looking to see, are you intending to do harm? Okay? And I sat down with a wonderful couple I'm friends with, and the mom said, well, you know what? If they're going to put those outside of stadiums and I can take my boys in to see a football game, then that's just absolutely fantastic if it's going to keep me safe. And I said, what happens when that technology is used when your son's 18 years old and he's considered a political dissident? Because our country's gotten to the point where they don't agree with how he sees the world. So that, for me, this issue about you just go into the store, just go and get your milk, it's kind of a head in the sand sort of a situation. I don't know if you just ignore it.
To answer your question, which is why you wouldn't want that out there, is from an employment standpoint. Notwithstanding it's against the law, humans are humans, and they're going to look for data on you. And you're making an application for a job, and suddenly you've got a medical complication, and it's a small company, and the last thing they want to do is skew their insurance premiums. So there's two candidates. They're both equally weighted, and it turns out they inadvertently, because it's on the web, understand someone's got a health issue. I'm not suggesting anyone ever do this, but human nature might be they'd go with the healthier person.
They
bottom
took the
line
apples out of Happy Meals, and so you want them watching what you're buying in the store? You don't think Michelle Obama would like to come and say, not so much with the junk food?
Oh, I'd love Michelle Obama to approach me at my refrigerator.
Look what I've been carrying, just to remind me.
Yeah, the loyalty card.
Okay, this is your loyalty card. Most people use it in different stores. Hey, you go into your whatever your chain store is, and you get grapes at 50 cents off, as it might be. This is a disaster for you. Okay, if you use one of these in your own name, stop tomorrow. Okay, you can choose how you want to register yourself, because eventually what it's going to be, and I guarantee they're already doing it, is someone is going to be able to buy the data that says Jim Jones buys...
Probably a bad name to use. Let's leave Steven Schwartz.
Steven Schwartz.
Yes.
Steve Johnson.
Jim Jones, he comes buying this Kool-Aid in these
loves the
buckets. What?
All right. Very well said.
All right.
You made application for insurance. You need to go to a new insurance company, and they've logged in and they figured out that you are a Twinkie eater or you're an ice cream eater, and they figured out that, or cigarettes as it might be, there's a propensity to eat junk food as it might be. Well, some people might interpret that as going to have an influence on your health.
And anyone who thinks that's not going to happen, look at government health care. Once they take government health care, which is what, next year, once you have government health care and the private sector goes away, it's for the collective. It's for the common good. They have to do these things because grandma needs to have something and little Timmy down the street needs to have something. And so you've got to play ball. It's a patriotic American thing to do. We're all in this together. Eat grapes. No more Twinkies for you. It's totally reasonable. Back in just a second.